The mistake businesses can so easily make is to assume that creativity itself is not important.
Hello and welcome to the latest episode of Do More with Less. We talk to the world's top marketing leaders and thinkers to understand and share how individuals and teams are best responding to the very blunt instruction to do more with less. Today I'm talking to Peter Field, one of the world's leading thinkers in brand effectiveness. You may have heard his name in a Batman and Robin type scenario, Binet and Field, or Field and Binet. These guys wrote the long and short of it, and later, in 2019, the 5 principles of growth in B2B marketing. Now, if you check out Peter's LinkedIn account, you'll find he's incredibly modest about himself, describing himself as an author, a consultant, a practitioner. I will go with the LinkedIn B2B Institute's definition or description of Peter, along with sometime research partner Les Binet, one of the greatest marketing minds of our time. Hello, Peter. How are you?
Hi, Mike. All good, thanks. Yeah. Having a good time at the moment. And these are crazy times, as we know, and I'm sure we'll get into all of that. So it keeps people like me busy. Craziness is...
I haven't spoken to you and Les since you kindly gave your time to interview for the book I wrote in 2021. I want to start with a kind of open question to you, Peter. Your work is largely based on case study analysis so that you can absolutely point to works that is either pioneering or just more effective. And you've always had a really, really strong take on the link that you see is absolute between creativity and effectiveness. How is that playing out in this new AI and attention-driven economy? Are you still very, very certain of the need for creativity to be in any way effective?
Great question, Mark. And there's kind of lots of issues in that question, so we might have to break them down a little bit. But first of all, let me just say that I think that the developments in AI have the potential to be either fantastically helpful or horribly destructive, and I think they will be both. But I think hugely helpful in the sense that AI gives businesses the ability to experiment faster and much more cheaply, I think, than they've ever been able to do. So the opportunity to use AI to boost creativity is great. The mistake I think, businesses can so easily make is to assume that creativity itself is not important and that somehow, we can reduce this to a mechanical process that's just done through, kind of software, essentially. Now, that would be a big mistake because ultimately, the source of advantage that businesses have in the world of marketing comes in large part from their creativity, the extent to which they can out-express themselves compared to others when they perhaps have very similar levels of resource. And AI, as yet, I don't think enables us to originate ideas to do that. What it does enable us to do very well is to execute ideas. So, I've seen some lovely examples of where essentially human creativity has been executed very fast and very cheaply through the use of AI. So I do think it's oscillating neutral. It doesn't change the fundamental rules that we're selling to human beings, and human beings will make decisions in all the usual ways. If it comes to the point where decisions in companies are made exclusively through AI and selling to them is made exclusively through AI, then we may have to scratch our heads a bit again. But I think that would be a potentially very, very dangerous, commoditizing kind of world, because ultimately the algorithms are going to converge on one thing. There'll be no difference. But for the time being, anyway, human beings make the decisions. And if we're selling to human beings, then there are human understandings and human processes that we have to go on. And central to those is creativity, because creativity doesn't just grab our attention better, it persuades us better.
Hello, sorry to interrupt. Do More with Less is a podcast and a webinar and a set of events that's made possible entirely by marketing resource group Orbital X. If you would like to know how we credibly claim many millions of pounds worth of pipeline influenced by our marketing resource group support and up to 60% of your closed won deals, give us a call, half an hour with one of us. Really happy to talk to you and explain how that works and how it might look for your business. Thank you for allowing this interruption. Back to the podcast. Do you see that? I mean, just for my B2B listeners who are struggling for the right balance and the right formula in order to try and figure out how to do more with less. Over on the other side, do you see it in B2C as well? Are you still having to bang the drum for creativity in consumer marketing?
Yeah, no, I mean, everyone needs to do more with less, and I'm fully supportive and on board with that. So when I talk about creativity, it's not some kind of lovey desire to have lots of, kind of really great award-winning creative ads. It's for really hard-nosed business reasons, and that is that, creativity helps us get attention, and that's what we fundamentally need. It is more effective, and in particular, it enables us to do more with less. We have a straight choice, and any of you listening here who have followed the Cost of Dull project, which I've been very involved in, which looks at both creative.
Is that with Adam Morgan at Eat Big Fish?
This is Adam Morgan's project, yeah, which I think was brilliant. The timing was perfect and has been, I think, hugely impactful and successful, and quite rightly so too, for reasons I'll come to. We really needed to hear this message, I think. But, what that is really all about is to say, in a resource-starved business world, we have to find ways of doing more with less. And that is as much applicable to media choices as it is to creative choices as well. And that's been the great insight of all of this. But, we can, and I should say, one of the first principle in the 5 principles of B2B that you referred to kindly earlier, that Les and I wrote, was about investing in share of voice. And of course, that remains true. We need to be aware of our budgets and ensure that we're not being unrealistic with them. But that has never been good enough, and is certainly not good enough now. You have to have an adequate budget, but you have to make sure that you are, every dollar, every pound, every euro you put into your marketing is likely to work harder than your competitors. Because that's what's going to drive effectiveness, and ultimately because that's what's going to preserve your budgets. The CEO, the CFO are going to carry on pouring money into marketing as they see it producing, kind of good results. So we've got to do more with less, and I am 100% on board with that and supportive of that as a challenge, and that's what the Cost of Dull is all about. So any of you listening here who hasn't followed the Cost of Dull, search for it, look at Adam Morgan's work that he's done on it. eatbigfish.com's his website. He's the father of all of this, and it's really worth the read.
I endorse that completely. I've met Adam a couple of times, but I'm very close to Helen Redstone, who works at Eat Big Fish from my university years, and as soon as the Cost of Dull project started happening, persuaded her, which she very kindly did, to send me a copy of the first tranche of data, and in the form of a brochure that you guys created. And just being able to quantify the sheer incredible cost of, I think, I'm not going to try and quote the figures, but I remember one.
So the numbers are eye-watching.
Yeah,
absolutely.
I mean, I think there was a stat that said, in the US, based on the advertising effectiveness of everything across the year before, the cost of ineffective messaging and advertising due to just being boring was about the GDP of Greece. It was completely balmy.
I mean, this is essentially, this is US. I mean, this was all kind of normalized around US data. So they used System 1 data for the creative side of it. Yeah. So that is TV, pretty much TV only. That's a big slug of it. So the Cost of Dull, so with this is defined by saying how much extra do the dullest campaigns, the bottom quartile of most dull campaigns, how much extra would they have to spend in aggregate to match the effectiveness of the top quartile, the least dull, the most interesting campaigns? And, the definitions of those are all transparent and very clearly measured in the metrics are all there to talk about. And the answer was just short of 200 billion. Across the US. These are enormous sums of money. You have to be insane not to take account of that. And that is a global, that's B2C and B2B all mixed up.
Yeah.
And it will apply as much to B2B as
you simply can't afford to be functional and boring about your advertising in B2B. And if we just were to go through the principles in very, very short form, Principle 1 was invest in share of voice, which you mentioned. Share of voice over share of market would grow your business. The opposite would shrink your business. Balance brand and activation, expand your customer base, maximize mental availability, and harness the power of emotion. And by the way, just to tie that together, if you are not measuring marketing's impact past 6 months, you have no incentive or pointers to use creativity or anything to build a long term. Now, I would imagine with LinkedIn having been full of people, gurus and everyone boasting around, your 5 principles and your creativity, I would imagine that 4% has grown. But looking at the market, I don't imagine it's grown by much. I would still say if it was over 15%, I'd be surprised. Yeah. Measuring impact beyond 6 months, why is it so hard for us?
Well, look, I've had this conversation with CMOs very, very regularly, and I was recently speaking at an event in Switzerland where we were precisely talking about this issue, and I do not blame CMOs for this problem. Yes, some of them perhaps don't do themselves any favours. The problem I get relentlessly reported back to me is you just cannot sell long-term view and long-term media choices and the long-term model into CEO and CFOs. They just are not prepared to buy it. And, and I absolutely understand that, and I don't make light of that. So I'm not one of those people who just sits back and says, look, CMOs, get your act together, guys. What are you doing out there? Because a lot of the ones I speak to, really bright.
It's a very, very, it's a business trouble, right? Yeah.
Exactly. And I think we all need to get the message about the challenges of, getting noticed and the value of creating long-term brand appeal. We need to get that to CFOs and CEOs. Mostly they come from finance backgrounds. They do not have marketing backgrounds. Why the hell, how can we expect them to know the principles of marketing and how marketing works? That's not their background. And I think, if I do have one criticism of the world of marketing science, is that we have sought to make this all far too scientific and rule-based. The fact is that there is only so far we can go with rules. At the end of the day, there has to be room for creativity and inspiration, because that is what will ultimately make the difference. So we have to sell this in to CFOs and CEOs so that they understand that there is enormous value in the brand and understanding what makes great brands, which is not simply about facts and figures. It's about what the brand stands for, how it makes customers feel. And that was, as you pointed out, our last of the 5 principles is about emotions, power of emotions. And this is, again, we don't bang on about emotions because we want to make soft, fluffy advertising. It's because it works, and, this is one of many areas, and I think this is probably the area where perhaps it is most difficult to convince CFOs and CEOs, why do we want to get emotional, particularly in B2B? In the world of B2B, I think the trick is to find an emotional palette that resonates with the products that we offer. So there's got to be a fit there.
Obviously, if you're building or selling products or services that are around cybersecurity or parts for aeroplanes that are to do with safety, there's a palette that is appropriate to you.
Yes, and that will look very different from if we're, I don't know, selling, let's say, art supplies to businesses in some way. They're obviously going to be very different. But at the end of the day, the question we have to ask is, does this kind of have some emotional impact with the buyer? And that could be, I get to sleep better at night. It could be, people recognize the challenges I go through. But emotions are complex things. These are kind of basic things. And emotions in B2B, of course, are very different from emotions in B2C. We shouldn't assume that if we're getting emotions in B2B advertising, then our advertising is going to look like B2C. It doesn't. Great B2B advertising plays with a different palette of emotions, usually, than B2C. Not always, but usually. Its challenges have grown. It is more difficult to measure share of voice than it used to be. So we may not know, when we talk about balancing brand and activation, huge pressures from above. We know CEOs and CFOs are constantly pressuring us to focus on the bottom of the funnel instead of feeding the top of the funnel. We have to win that argument with them that the best way to feed the bottom of the funnel is to have fed the top of the funnel months, years earlier. The arguments are very clear and very strong. There's lots of data.
It's really difficult though, because I work with a host of B2B clients that are from every different industry and sector I can think of, from construction to cybersecurity to everything in between. And the emergence of AI, regardless of whether we think it can be broadly positive, broadly negative, how you treat it, has just served to once again speed everything up in the perception of how quickly things need to work. And so we will always be responsible enough to sell the idea that we will get you results straight away, but the results will build and grow over time and compound over time until you are looking at a perfectly humming marketing machine. And yet the pressure on marketers to deliver hard results and numbers in month one is something they understand is balmy, but they still have to ask for it. And it's crazy. And the example I'd give is, I try to talk about, in one job, I try to talk about the power of humor and how it can be the thing that instinctively, well, that's the ad I'm going to share. That's the ad I'm going to remember. I still remember a FedEx ad from like 10, 15 years ago where it was a boss came over to a new starter and said, we need to get you really, really into the weeds. We need to get you going. Can I help you? And the guy said, oh, no, sorry. I don't do the execution. I'm an MBA from Harvard. And she went, don't worry, we can train you. And I still remember the effect. It's simple. It's just a little funny twist. It's a line, it's a payoff, but I still remember it. Why? Because it made me laugh, and I might have shared it with some people.
Actually, FedEx is a good case. So if you go back to some of the really early famous advertising that FedEx did in the US and used to roll out, it was based on humor. It really was. It was based on having fun with the alternatives to using FedEx. And, it's a good example of a business that really understood that humor doesn't in any way belittle us. It shows confidence. It opens up a relationship. Why do good salespeople often use humor in a selling situation? It's not because they want to be seen as jokers. It's because they know it unlocks the doors of persuasion.
And trust somehow.
And trust, absolutely.
I remember a specific where I was on a leadership team over 2 or 3 months working on the correct OKRs or KPIs for the following year, and I couldn't get brand awareness onto the agenda. I tried 3 or 4 times, and it was only when I sent a final Slack message round to the leadership saying, look, just one more time, if you ask all the different marketing professors from the Institute and Ritson and all the rest of it, Ehrenberg, Bass, all those guys, they'll all come up with different theories on different. The one thing they really do agree on, it seems, is if your share of voice is greater than your share of market, you'll grow. If it's less, you'll shrink. And the very act of turning it into an equation maths, the CEO wrote back to me on Slack, went, you know what, I get that. If you'd said that from the start, this would have been easier. And the following year, true to form, I was allowed, for the first time in that company, to do a very, very simple research exercise with a partner, a research partner, on brand awareness of us and our market and our competitors and what we all were seen to stand for and where the biggest opportunities to drill into. And we were all around 15 or 16% awareness for the market that we serve. And I was like, right, and here are the parts that if we really, really drill into, this is what we're known for, this is what we're loved for, this is what we're bought for. There's an opportunity for anyone to jump ahead, do another piece at the end of the year, and suddenly you've got maths to show them. It kind of works a little bit.
So, what we've learned from the work of Karen Nelson Fields in Australia and Lumen in the UK is that, our media choices absolutely frame our ability to build those brands, because it is all about how much attention we can create for the units of investment that we make. And, I think we've all been led down a very, kind of dangerous route, in the sense we've been putting far too much money into social media, particularly B2C. But I think, I've spoken to enough B2B marketers to know there are some serious questions about the effectiveness of B2B social as well. It's just very difficult to cut through in social, because people have, people are not really looking for ads. It's not an environment where their attention to ads is very, very short. So, in the world of B2C, Facebook, typically Facebook in feed is about a second of attention. We know from marketing science, from attention science now, you just can't build a brand in that period of time. Such a fleeting glimpse at an ad, you're never going to build a brand. Now, this is intuitively obvious, but we've been so obsessed with the idea of, social being the future. This is the future of music. We've got to put money in it. Well, that would be great if it worked, but it's just really difficult to make it work long term. We can use it at bottom of funnel, but top of funnel, different. But it all comes back to this idea, this absolute essential requirement of building mental availability, building this share of mind, the fact that our brand is the one that tends to come to the top of the pile when people are thinking about our category. And that absolutely has to be a good thing. So, there is a media equivalent of cost of dull. There are dull media where it is really difficult to get attention. No matter how good your ads are, you're just not going to get them. And there are non-dull media, where, and often these are legacy platforms. Why do so many B2B businesses in the UK now use things like TV, radio, print? Because, you get great attention. And if you're running good ads on those platforms, you're going to get very good attention. And that is critical to building the brand, creating awareness, and ultimately, bringing in new customers. Because that's the other thing, which the Ambo Bass Institute has, of course, taught us over many years. I went to a lecture given by Andrew Ehrenberg 40 years ago now, I'm embarrassed to admit, in which he banged on about it. And the reality is the truth has not changed. If you want to grow, you need new incremental customers coming through your doors. You're not going to do it by, just banging on your message to existing customers. You've got to bring them in. So bringing your customers in means creating a brand that is known and trusted and attractive out there. And so this has huge implications for the kind of message and the kind of targeting. We've got to target broad. And the moment you start targeting broad, even in B2B, it means it has media implications for sure. Absolutely for sure.
If you want to hear, this is to listeners, if you want to read something on media channels in B2B, I wrote something just a couple of weeks ago on B2B Marketing United, which you'll find at b2bmarketing.com, on outdoor advertising for B2B brands, out-of-home advertising, which may sound counterintuitive, but there's some good arguments in there based everything I wrote on a really smart piece written before me by Dan Walker-Smith, which is cited in the piece, of course, but it's really, really worth having a look at that, because I think we almost, in B2B, we almost cut ourselves off from growth opportunities based on a kind of sense that B2B doesn't do that, in quotation marks, and actually targeted out of home advertising for B2B products and services right now. The ones that are using it, the ones that are doing it, you always notice. Not just because they are rare, but because they are really using the media very well.
I mean, Mark, you just said something really interesting, which I think is actually very profound. You said people don't do it because B2B doesn't do that. And of course, that is precisely the reason you should consider doing it.
Yeah.
Because quite often there is no reason why B2B should be doing it. It's just, it didn't feel right. They didn't think of doing it, and so long as the numbers stack up, so long as you can reach your audience in a reasonably cost-effective way, taking into account the amazing attention you might well build by going into a medium that is not cluttered by your competitors, you could be the only player in your sector, in your category, in that environment. That has huge value. It is worth paying for some wastage. We've become obsessed with wastage. I don't want to serve my message to anyone who can't buy it. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's an obsession. That is a really dumb obsession. Just look at the costs and the impact of that spend on the people who are buying. And in that context, wastage can actually be very, very good. The main thing is, will we get their attention? Showing up in a medium or a platform where you're not expecting to see players in your sector, that can be great, really good. There's a very, very long and rich history of case studies where playing with the media rules was a big part of the success stories. Yeah.
I've got one final question for you, Peter, and it's genuinely not as provocative as I'm sure it will sound. It is. It comes. It comes from a place of absolute respect. Okay, B2B marketing has not accelerated to a place where we are proving the application of your work because we're not trying it. There are still, for all the reasons we've discussed, there's still a fear by B2B marketing bosses and its CEOs. You're not ready, you're not brave enough to accept concepts such as emotional over rational, or reaching new customers when you can get your current customers to spend a bit more, or characters in ads and all that stuff, right? You put years and years of research behind long and short, and some serious research into 5 principles, and it was all based on stories that it wasn't prediction, it wasn't future gazing, it was on stuff that had already happened.
I mean, these are real case studies of real success, absolutely.
Can I ask you, and I'm sure you're not bothered by this because you did the work, but do you feel like you've in any way failed? Was it ever part of your...
Totally.
Yeah.
Absolutely. No, look, I mean, within the world of shall we say, blue chip marketing, I mean, the work that Les and I have done and others is often quoted and flattered and all the rest of it. But the reality of it is that its impact on the broad swathe of marketing has been quite limited. So, certainly failure exceeds success. We've succeeded.
But is it your failure? Because we're a global community. You're famous for the way you communicate this stuff.
Well, we're up against some very tough competitors. So let's be clear about why I think we failed. We failed, firstly, because there is an extremely well-funded machinery that does not want the message to get through. The performance marketing world and the big tech businesses that back it, absolutely, this is not in their interest. They spent, 15, 20 years selling in the idea that brand was last millennium's concept, absolutely from the birth of Facebook onwards. They may have changed their tune more recently, but that was very much the idea that all you need, focus on the bottom of the funnel, and you've got guaranteed results. So you're up against an enormously well-funded machine that is constantly picking and trying to that message and say, just stick with what we tell you. And that's still happening now. They're using AI now as a way to say, you don't need all of that rubbish. Certainty lies with basically bottom of the funnel thinking. The metrics have always been easier as well. Bottom of the funnel metrics are easier to gather. So And the other thing, of course, is this very well-funded machine has been smart enough to go to sell in at CEO and CFO level. They've gone way above the marketers, and marketers are already being told what the answer is before they even get to a marketing plan. So, that I think is the principal reason that, our work hasn't achieved more than it might have done. And of course, there have been other things. We've had an eventful 20 years or so. We had the global financial crisis. We had COVID. We've had wars. We've got conflict to add to it now, multiple conflicts. Every time the business world gets ruffled, not unreasonably, it thinks, oh God, let's just focus on the now. Yeah. And of course, that is not smart. We know from a lot of work on downturns and recessions that the smart thing to do in a downturn is to take a longer term view. Yeah. You get your returns now, but you get much bigger returns. So there's been lots of reasons, but
I did wonder whether I did wonder how you looked at that, because on one hand, your name is referenced in every great marketing training. Rickson uses it in his mini MBA. Again, not to compare, but you're not just in the book Boring to Brave. I quote you and Les extensively in a leadership course I've just put together for b2bmarketing.com at the same name, but you're literally referenced everywhere. And I just wonder whether you and Les ever together or separately sort of find yourself sitting over a pint of something in a pub, just wistfully going, do you know what, we did the work and we did the report, but it hasn't communicated effectively, or whether you are good to sort of sit there and go, do you know what, that was somebody else's job, that part. We did the work. It's there for anyone to see.
Yeah, no, well, Les and I we've done an awful lot over the last 15 years to try and put the message around. I think Mark Ritson's been hugely helpful. Mm-hmm. Not everyone in the world of marketing is, there are kind of turf wars, of course, out there. Not everyone wants to, to support our work. Broadly speaking, I think sometimes we're not all helpful to one another. We should, I think by and large, most marketing kind of theorists and practical people like Les and I kind of align on same messages, and we should be more supportive of one another, but that's another issue. The fact of the matter is that we've got a huge uphill struggle constantly to get this message over, because there's new generations coming into the business constantly being persuaded that the future is, different from the past, and that those global principles don't really apply. So you just have to keep kind of reminding everyone. But yeah, no, I certainly do not in any sense sit back and think job done. Job is not remotely done, and it never will be done. I think you just have to keep running. And the other point I would make about this is that understanding why the principles of growth work requires emotional intelligence. You have to understand the way humans' brains work. And for many people, particularly in tech businesses and often in business, that's not necessarily their forte. If you're a CFO, you probably didn't get to be a great CFO because, you understand, you empathize with human beings. You got there because you were good at the numbers and good at understanding businesses. So, it requires skills that are not always innate with the people that have been driving the business and comms agenda. So it's always going to be necessary, I think, to remind people of the way humans work and tick.
Well, I can tell you, Peter, that I am incredibly proud and pleased, and so is Orbital X, to feature you on our podcast. So thank you ever so much for your time.
Pleasure to be.
And for your thoughts and insights as ever. And good luck. We'll carry on fighting, and we'll see you again very soon. Take care.
All right. Thanks, Mark.
Bye.